Hi, I'm Tim Ash, best-selling author of Unleash Your Primal Brain and international keynote speaker. And today on the show, we're going to talk about why you're telling the wrong stories as a leader and how that's going to get you in trouble, and why shortchanging yourself on sleep makes you the equivalent of someone who's being physically tortured.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Have you considered that your brain, that brain that you love so much, reacts long before you think you've made a rational response? Have you considered that? Moreover, have you discovered how to tap into the primal part of your brain and turn it into your leadership advantage? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more about me, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. And I want to remind you that this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? It's exactly what your heart, your soul, and your mind have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. I'm talking about neuroscientists, astronauts, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy Award-winning entertainers, and actually our guest today is even on that show too. So you can go there and you can find out more about him too. It's even people who you think you would completely disagree with, you'll find truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into a delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you tune into podcasts. And we're always grateful and relevant. We're always grateful to you for keeping us relevant. So please get over to wherever it is you tune into podcasts and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also listen to us on Google Home or Alexa. Just simply say, play Dov Baron podcast. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, well, all of us as leaders, we like to think of ourselves as strong and rational and logical people. But have you considered that your brain is far greater in its capacity than you've ever imagined? But how can you and I learn how to unleash that primal part of our brain to motivate, inspire, and even drive fierce loyalty in our employees and our customers? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going. You see, our guest today is Tim Ash. Tim Ash is an acknowledged authority on evolutionary psychology and digital marketing. He's a sought-after international keynote speaker. Tim has been mentioned by Forbes as a top 10 online marketing expert and by Entrepreneur Magazine as an online marketing influencer to watch. Tim earned a dual major Bachelor's of Science degree with the highest distinction in computer engineering and cognitive science from UC San Diego, while studying on the UC Regents Scholarship. That's the highest academic award for the UC system. He stayed at UC, University of California, San Diego, for a PhD studies focused on machine learning and artificial intelligence. For 19 years, he was the co-founder and CEO of SiteTurners, a digital optimization agency. Tim helped to create over $1.2 billion of value for companies like, you may have heard of them, Google, Expedia, eHarmony, um, Nestle, Siemens, Canon, American Express, Facebook, small companies, probably never heard of them. He's the best-selling author of Unleash Your Primal Brain, which has sold 50,000 copies worldwide in the last 3 days. Not true, but very, very quickly. And the book has been translated into 6 languages. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome my brainiac friend, Tim Ash.
Crowd goes wild. Thanks, Dan. It's my pleasure to be with you. Hello. Привет.
Nice to
Очень
have you,
приятно.
mate. Really good. I always love talking to you. And as I said at the beginning, for those of you, if you find this a valuable conversation, I encourage you to go over to Curiosity Bites, look up Tim Ash and his interview on there. It's a 4-part series. We go really in depth. It's pretty powerful stuff. And I loved that conversation. I think you will too. So where we always like to start, Tim, in this world of influencers and people who are, supposed to be authorities, who is somebody who we may not know or may not even consider who's been a major influence on your leadership? Who's had that impact on you?
Well, I think one of the books that I cited in my most recent book was called The Secret of Their Success. It was by Joseph Heinrich. And he talks a lot about culture and about how we actually evolved to transmit culture. And I devote a couple of chapters of it, of that in my book also. And so I think that thinking about leadership from a evolutionary and cultural standpoint, I think is a really powerful doorway to open. And I'm glad I ran across his stuff a few years ago.
How has that directly impacted the way that you think about leadership?
Well, one of the things that I realize is that in the West here, we have this notion that people are very independent. And what we do matters, what our life purpose matters, and in fact, we're very communal creatures. We can't not be affected by the culture and the tribal beliefs around us. So in a way, you could say an organization, a company, whatever thing you're running as a leader is a tribe. Yep. And in order to understand how tribes work and unlocking that makes you a more effective leader. So that's what I mean by that perspective. So how do you transmit cultural values? How do you maintain cohesion? How do you maintain group hierarchies? All of those things are built into us at a very primal level. And you have to understand kind of the operating system by which we all work, and then say, hey, how does your software overlay on top of that? What are the values and the stories that you tell, and how do they impact your group?
So that's a really important point, because when I look at that and I think about, because you and I have discussed before my study of evolutionary psychology as well, and neurosciences, and certainly in leadership and psychology, it's fascinating to me. You talked about in the Western world, and it's fascinating to me that the Western world is infected, I'll use that term, the rest of the world. And this American dream of independence, and it's about me and my identity and all the rest of it.
Yep.
But that's so new.
Yeah, I call it the primacy of the individual versus basically like communal orientation or individual orientation. And really, I mean, goes back further than America and the American kind of, even Texan, I'll call it, like Lone Star, do it myself. I don't care if my power goes out, just soldier on, because the government don't owe you anything. That's extreme individualism. But really, this goes back to early Catholicism, and when we decided not to have kinship marriage in about 500 AD, and then that led to the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and all the success of Europe. And temporarily, Europe has, like you said, shifted that balance of power in the world because of these weird individualistic ideas that we have in our heads.
Yeah, but I think that this is where we, I think that this is where we have seen the rise of the narcissistic leader, right? People talk today about fascism, and they talk about, narcissism in a general sense, but we have facilitated narcissistic leadership based on this individualism. And great leaders, I mean, really, truly great leaders, we're not talking about the ones who get all the applause, but truly great leaders are people who know how to use their primal brain to tap into how to bring their people together to create that tribe. So I know you've kind of just skimmed over it there a bit, and we'll go a little bit deeper and then we'll go really deep. But why is understanding how to unleash your primal brain, which is the title of your book, as people who are watching on video can see behind you, why is that so important to leaders, industry leaders, management leaders, whatever it might be?
Well, we, as you said, that the idea that we're rational is also very deep in Western culture, going back to Socrates and Plato. And if we could only tame our wild horses of our emotions and be Mr. Spock, we'd all be better off. Well, it turns out that's not true at all. And so anyone that kind of tries to engineer a culture or an organization and make it exactly optimal and rational is really missing the power of community, of tribe. And again, we evolved, we're weak as individuals, but to be stronger as a tribe. And that really requires us to be super cohesive. So the job of a leader, to me, is to create the strongest tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's rarely led by what you call the narcissistic leader.
Right.
It's by that strong man. In other words, there's really kind of two different things that are operating. One is our mammalian inheritance, which is dominance, right? Whoever is the alpha, and you maintain alpha either by physical strength or strong alliances, but basically it's bullying. I can make you do what I want you to do. That's being an alpha. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's very different in motivation than prestige, which is our uniquely human kind of inheritance. And that's all about transmitting culture and paying it forward. And so somebody is really powerful in a particular field, we expect them to teach that, to bring others along. I mean, the catchword this week is servant leadership, right? We can call it that, but really it's deeply embedded in our evolutionary psychology, is to kind of keep that cultural chain going and teach others.
Yeah. It's interesting that I find it fascinating that the Spock character, which is actually a beautiful character, because it is a man who is half half Vulcan and half human, and it tries to dominate with his Vulcan rational logical side. And I think in many ways he is such a great example of modern man, in that we're trying to pretend that human side of us doesn't exist, and it is dominant. It will always be dominant because it is what it is. And so talk to us about that battle, because you and I know, as we're dealing with leaders, that we're dealing with leaders who are saying, but I'm a very rational guy and I don't want to deal with all that woo-woo emotional stuff.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If you think of a leader as being decisive, of making good decisions and so on, here's the thing. You literally cannot make a decision without emotions. All that the rational conscious mind can do is provide you with options. Options A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, but which of those you pick depends on your emotions. Do you have a strong aversion to that idea? Do you have a strong affinity for that idea? The stronger the emotion, the more likely you are to zero in on that choice. In other words, emotions help us take an infinite number of choices we can make in any given moment and narrows it down to something actionable. And that's the stuff we focus on. So emotion is a focusing mechanism. It is what actually decides. There is no such thing as a purely objective choice. By the way, one of the things I want to remind people of, real fans of Star Trek, and you may be one like me, is that the Vulcans weren't rational. The Vulcans were extremely passionate and emotional, and they basically went mad. And so the backstory is that their attempt to become rational was a reaction to channeling these really strong emotions, but they were underneath and they had to go through this trial by fire to come out logical on the other side.
Yeah. And this is why I think that our work, your work, my work is so important, because still such resistance to emotion. And what I'm always trying to explain is that that is your fuel. Like if you say, I'm not an emotional person, you are cutting off the fuel. You are saying, I'm going to take the 18-inch pipe, I'm going to narrow it down to a garden hose and expect the vehicle to run well. It's not going to run well.
Well, and also as motivation, you're not going to impact other people without emotion. If I start all of a sudden talking like this, and in my spreadsheet model, it says the following, how many people are going along for that ride? Nobody. But if you say, there's this thing and it's important and we need to go do it, there's no such thing as a leader without emotion. Again, that can be used for bad. You can have populists stir you up and make you do all kinds of inhumane things with emotion. But there's basically, you can't motivate groups of people without emotion. So as a leader, if you want to have an impact, you have to be able to generate emotions. I took a recent speaker training, for example, fantastic training. And one of the things that I've done as a result is when I do my keynote speeches, in my script, I actually put in a notation that says this segment of stuff I'm talking about is supposed to generate the following emotions. So I write the script almost as an emotional script, like a musical score in which I'm going to be playing the impact that I want it to have on people. So begin with the end in mind, and the end should be an emotional reaction that motivates people to do what you want them to do.
Yeah. And again, we want to be very clear here that this is neutral. The application of it could be extremely negative, can be extremely positive, but it is a neutral thing that you can use. A knife is something you can pick up and cut somebody some food and feed them, or you can also stab them in the neck with it. Yeah. You can do either. It's neutral. And it's the same thing with these tools of understanding motivation and understanding how to tap into emotion, and using those things well, doesn't mean you're using them for good.
No, that's true.
Yeah, but very badly.
And as a leader, though, I guess my point is, most of the time our brain's there to conserve energy. It takes a lot of energy to run, especially in humans. A quarter of our resting calories are used to power our brain. That's a disproportionate huge amount. So we basically keep the brain on standby, and our default in any situation is ignore it and do nothing. The brain is an ignoring machine. So if you as a leader actually want to motivate someone, you have to move them off of that comfortable spot. So my choice is to ignore you, or for you to motivate me either with upside or downside, scare me or thrill me. Loss avoidance and fear are actually more effective, but that's another topic. But you have to move me off my comfortable spot. And if you're not doing that with emotion, I'm just not going to do anything for you. I'll put in my 40 hours a week or whatever you force me to do. I'll punch the time clock, but you're not going to get my full engagement as an employee or tribal member.
Yeah. As I wrote about in Fiercely Loyal, my last business book, I wrote about in there that, according to Gallup, that the rate of disengagement, depending on whether it's active or passive, is around 70+% of people who are in no jobs. Mm-hmm. And I said, so what if you just boil it down to the simple understanding of what does engagement mean? It means I'm emotionally involved. Mm-hmm. It means I've checked out, but I can still type the numbers. I'm disengaged. But if I'm emotionally involved, I become evangelical for our organization. I become evangelical for our purpose. I become evangelical for our product. And that's what we need to do as leaders. We need to lead from understanding how to tap that in individuals. So let's go to that for a minute. Let's talk about getting this tribal loyalty and commitment from your team, because I know that our listeners are leaders in one form or another. Give us the understanding of it first, and then a way to do that so people can grasp it.
Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's your mission statement. Our values are transparency and diversity and inclusion or whatever.
Exactly.
Great. Congratulations.
Yeah.
What actually matters is tribal cohesion. That's what made us survive, right? So if you were the one that I say, well, the world is flat, and you say, well, no, Tim, actually, I climbed up on the mast of the ship and I saw that on the horizon, it kind of curves a little. The Earth is really a sphere. You know what my tribe would do to you, Dove? They'd throw you off that freaking mast.
Of course.
Yeah, because you're kind of a wrench in the machine. You know, you're sanding the gears. You're not spreading the culture of the world is flat efficiently enough. And so tribal cohesion is more important than being right. And so being a team player and conformity is more important than being unique or right. So what you have to think about is, what are the conduits for spreading culture in our organization? What kind of stories do we tell? What are the morals of those stories? What do we allow? What do we forbid and frown upon? Because people live in a world of social norms. We may not even know what the rules are for a particular environment, but we assume that any organization that we're a part of operates based on some social rules. And just our job to figure out what they are. So we figure that out largely by drinking in the stories. So what do you talk about around the proverbial water cooler, or whatever the COVID equivalent of that is, the Zoom meeting? Do you penalize risk? Do you, what do you value? Do you value money over everything else? Do you value money over the happiness of your employees? Because a lot of the things you say, a lot of the stories you tell are going to be the true marker of your cultural values.
You know, that tribal cohesion, I mean, obviously it's vastly important in leadership, but I just want everybody to grasp it for a moment, because, you know, you talked about it in a way that I want to just evolve it a little bit. And that is that tribal cohesion is either the exposer of truth or the killer of truth. So the collective come together and say, nope, the world is flat. Even though the truth is the world is round, doesn't matter. We're going to kill everybody who says it's round. So it will kill the truth. But at the same time, if you get tribal cohesion that is committed to the truth, then it will kill the lies. And that's an interesting thing around, you know, we can look at the populist government in the United States in 2020 and from 2016 to 2020, and we can say, okay, doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, we can say certain things became true. It doesn't mean they're truth. They became true. As Kellyanne Conway said, there's alternative truths. And
okay, well, so you're diving into the politics, and I'll give you an example why tribal cohesion matters. So let's take a look at American contemporary politics. So the stereotypical left versus right. Okay. Now, if you look at the left, it's always there's I think it was Will Rogers that said, "I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat." Right. It's always been like this rainbow coalition, diverse stuff. You have people that care about climate change and are for choice, women's right to reproduce, all of that. There's a bunch of special interest groups that are under this umbrella. Right. Whereas the I guess you'd call the conservatives, which is actually a pretty radical stance these days. You know, you can say, I know you want your rights, your guns, your ability to pray, and largely, I would say, whiteness these days. Now, that's a pretty cohesive set of values. So they're much more easy to activate because they can all be told the same stories, and you can get a predictable cultural response as a result. And to reinforce that set of values is also relatively easy. So there's an advantage to being a cohesive political tribe. The right in the US is much more effective at organizing and mobilizing people and punch above their weight as a result. So again, I'm not saying which is right, which is good in terms of policies, okay, or how they act or the ultimate goals of those groups. I'm just saying that tribal cohesion is a huge advantage when struggling against other tribes. And that's really our evolutionary history, is tribe against tribe, not so much individual against individual.
No, and that's why I wanted to bring this in, because when you have because what I want to bring up to here and have you expand on is that tribal cohesion comes down to what are the base stories you tell,
Mm-hmm.
because so there, if we look at using what you just said before, like the left, and we say, okay, what are the stories they tell? Well, the stories they tell is the other side want to take away women's reproductive rights. Okay, what else do they tell? Well, they don't care about the climate. It's all about what they're doing, and there's too many stories, whereas there's only about 3 or 4 stories on the right,
Mm-hmm.
and they can funnel those stories into different areas, but it's still the same 3, 4 stories, and that is what works. So talk to us about the importance of, for leaders, business leaders today, about getting, because there's a origin story, which I talk about in my
Mm-hmm.
cultural
The
work,
origin myth, sure.
right? And then there is the stories we tell to support the origin stories. So talk to us about that and what our leaders listening can do to use that to build great, fiercely loyal tribes inside
Sure.
of
Well,
organizations.
I'll use another example from politics. This is,
Mm-hmm.
I went to high school in the early 80s and Ronald Reagan was the president. And he came out and, the brilliance of Reagan was he got things done. And he didn't try to do everything. He said, there's a couple of things we're going to do. We're going to stop those damn commie Russians, right? And we're going to have a morning in America. That was the theme of his campaign.
Yeah.
And so he was an actor and he was effective. He came out of Hollywood. He was effective because he basically just did the keynote. He struck the theme. He talked about this is the vision of where we're going. It wasn't about the details. He had people working for him that operationalized that into policies and did the details of that. But he was just saying, this is the direction we're going. So the purpose of a leader in storytelling is to set the direction and to repeat that story over and over and over again. As a leader, if you're not sick of saying your elevator speech, your very deliberately chosen stories, you're not doing it right, because just when you said it for the 1,000th time, it might begin to sink in for your team. So
That is such a good point for everybody to get. I remember a friend of mine coming to visit me from Australia, and he said, this was in I think like 94. And he said to me, he said, why aren't you telling your story? And I'm like, what story? And he goes, about the fall. I go, that was 1990, mate. That was 4 years ago. I'm so sick of talking about that. And he goes, well, don't worry. You've only got another 50 years of it. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, that's your story. You got to keep telling it, because every time you tell it, somebody hasn't heard it. Just because you're used to it doesn't mean somebody else is. And it has impact. It's an impactful story. And I'm like, okay. And it's exactly that message you're saying. But here's the key, because I train people to be speakers. And I say, here's the key. You have to find, not acted, you have to find genuine emotion delivering your story for the 10,000th time. And there's no part of it that can be an act. There's no part of it that can be just, oh, here's the story. It has to be like, what are you going to evoke inside of yourself to bring it forward? And it might not be the same bit of the story. It might be another bit, but it has to hit you, because here's the thing. And I tell this to speakers all the time. If you don't feel it, they won't hear it. And that's what you were saying right at the beginning about, we think we're rational, logical people, but if the person delivering the story, delivering the message, delivering the values isn't feeling it, the person on the other end, even though unconsciously, because it's the primal brain, reads that as you're full of shit. And that's it.
And Maya Angelou, I think her biggest contribution, besides her beautiful poetry, but is just one line she said, which is, people will not remember what you said. They won't remember what you did. They'll remember how you made them feel. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's the ultimate impact. So again, when I was talking about in a keynote speech, actually scripting the emotions I want to evoke, that should be, every leader shouldn't be thinking about policy and market dominance or anything like that. They should be thinking about the emotions they want to evoke based on their key stories that they tell over and over and over again. And you're right, you can't fake it. I have huge respect for, the bands that are like, hey, the Eagles or something. Oh man, play Hotel California one more time. I mean, they probably played it 10,000 times, or Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven as the encore. They have to hate that. But at the same time, you have to come up with whatever it is inside of you that you pull out that makes it real and genuine, and say it again.
Yeah. There's a very famous story of Frank Sinatra in his latter years standing on stage every single time and saying, I hate this song. I'm so sick of this song, but I know you want to hear it. And then he'd sing My Way. Right? Because he had sang it, so many times that he absolutely hated it. But he understood that it was evocative to those who were listening.
Hey, I hope they play that at my funeral. That's my theme song too.
Right. And I say to people, what is your theme song emotionally? Like, what is your theme song? And they say, oh, it's this. And I actually do this as part of my work when I'm teaching people to speak. I said, well, what's your theme song? And they go, what do you mean? And they go, no, not your favorite song, your theme song. Yep. Your home assignment this week is to come up with a theme song. And they go, what? It's a song that, like, if they played it at your funeral, it would represent you. What is it? And people, they come back and I say, now tell me the emotion. That's what you've got to translate. That's you. While you're living, while you are living, and so it's that same message for us as leaders, but also for us as organizations. What's the theme song of your organization? What's the theme song of your company? And by that, I don't mean your jingle. I mean your theme, your popular music theme song that says what you're about.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction too, because you talked about the origin myth earlier, right? Yes. A lot of times this is a leadership podcast. Maybe it's even the company founder that's listening right now. Yeah. One question you have to ask is, how closely is your personal origin myth tied to the company's origin myth? If you're the founder, if you're, I don't know, if you're Tony Robbins, then your theme song is your organization's theme song. Mm-hmm. If you're, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, you can't be, because it's just too big to be one man's theme song.
Right.
Or one person's theme song. So I think it's really important. You have to make a conscious decision. Should you have two theme songs, one for your company and one for yourself personally? And sometimes they're the same, but that's only if the leader is the brand, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, if the leader is the brand, it certainly that makes sense. But the point of that theme song, because it's you think about what a song is. A song is a story. So the purpose of the theme song is to evoke emotion, and this is where I want you to. I know we've said it, and we've said it several times already, but I really want you to get across to our leaders listening. Dude, you gotta kill off the part of you that wants to be Spock.
Right? Yeah. It's like, again, I'll use public speaking as an example. How many of us have sat through some kind of presentation? It was just PowerPoint, and I call it death by PowerPoint. Bullets, graphs, tables. It's like, oh my God, that rational part of the mind. If you want to turn someone off and have them go into what I call cold cognition instead of hot cognition, keep throwing numbers and data at them. And I used to think, when I first started public speaking, if I fire hose them with good information, how many slides can I pack in? How many bullet points? Then I'm going to give them the best value. And now I've stripped my slides down to being highly visual, having hardly any words, and telling stories. And guess what? I get paid to keynote across 4 continents, all over the world, in huge stages, because that's much more impactful. And so again, how you communicate most broadly is really the most important task of a leader. And storytelling is a part of that, but just think about what you're saying and what's the emotional impact you want it to have.
And I think that it's very interesting, because today more than ever, the attention span is smaller and smaller and smaller. And, I always say to the people the leaders I work with, I say, here's the thing. If you want to know something, go on Google. I don't care what it is you want to know. There's more than enough information to keep you consuming information for the next 100 years. But if you want to engage somebody, you've got to be able to evoke their emotion. That's not in the data. That's in something, unless you can tie the data to something, that's different altogether. So it's this key understanding about how we seem, particularly in the West, we're very driven away from, we want to not be emotional. We want to call that woo-woo. And as a guy, who I know and I know, Stan Slap, he says, if you think this is soft skills, you've got brain injury. You just don't get it. Like, this is the most important skill, is the evoking of emotion for the power of bringing it in other people. And it's used for bad and it's used for good. Every dictator who's ever lived has used it. It doesn't matter. Every great person's ever used it. It doesn't matter. And one of the things you said, which is earlier, is about repeating the story, is people, all of us remember, who are old enough, certainly, I know I remember it very well. We remember, even if we remember it from video, we remember Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in the Million Men March. Okay. You think that was the first time he delivered that speech? It wasn't. He delivered that speech hundreds of times in churches. It was never in the way he delivered it was different at the end, and the size of it was different, as in the length of it was different, but it was that same themed, emotionally evocative message that had been there. And it's not the repetition. It's not the repetition. It's the evocation. It's at least can I dig deeper into the emotion as I deliver this thing, whatever this is?
Yeah. And although it's important to say that you can't just manufacture generic emotions, because the same story will impact people differently depending on their values. So understanding your audience is really critical. And this is something that I give as my number one piece of advice as a marketer. But it also applies to organizational building and leadership, which is understand your audience and pick a focus. Go really deep on attracting a certain small group of people. If you're saying, well, my stuff can be sold to all 8 billion people on the planet, that's a really crappy game plan. But if you say, I'm selling this to single mothers that are going back to school that are in their mid-20s, okay, now you have something that you can focus in on. What do those people care about? And what am I going to say to them that's relevant? So I think another key thing for a leader, besides the storytelling and evoking of emotion, is to say no a lot. To say no to things that are not in the sweet spot, that are not in the target. To define in very black and white terms what's in and what's out. Okay, what we stand for and what we stand against. So providing that clarity, that contrast, and saying no to most things is really an important function of a leader.
I couldn't agree more. And again, that's back to the values thing, which I think most people don't really understand, but that's a whole different subject matter. But there's a piece here, which is you just brought up, and I think it's important for leaders to understand, whether those leaders that are listening are in the marketing world or not. Because if once you're a leader with any level of depth, you begin to understand that as a leader, you're a salesperson. You're selling the vision, you're selling the values, you're selling the purpose. And so, and nothing is sold without emotion. We all know that, or we should know that if we don't. However, in that process, there is, well, what is, okay, you just said, we got to find the sweet spot. So who are we aiming this at? Great. And then we say, what keeps them up at night? We've used that language for a long time. What is the problem they're trying to solve? Now we moved into what I term as being psychic. We're trying to work out what the emotional driver is of that human being. And a lot of the time, I find a lot of people are way off on that. They don't really get it. And I think the closer you are to it, the harder it is. So for me, I'm masterful at doing it for everybody else. For myself, I kind of suck.
Right. Or for your immediate family. What's that joke about? Why parents push your buttons so easily? Because they're the ones that installed them.
Yeah. Right. So in helping the leaders who are saying, okay, we're trying to launch something here. We think it's this. We've narrowed it down. We're going after. Let's say we're going after. I use one because we brought it up. We're going after political leaders. We're going after people in political leadership roles. That's our target. What do they want? We start guessing. How do we get past that guessing? Because that's where the idea of emotion becomes woo-woo.
Yeah, well, it's really actually very practical. So if you think of your organization as most of the time it's inside out. Here's our plan. Here's our SWOT analysis. Here's how we're going to approach the market. And now we're going to broadcast this crap out at the world. But really, you should invert that whole thing and make it an outside-in experience. Right. In other words, you go out there and you say, hey, what problems do people have? What misunderstandings they have? What is it that they really care about? And then how do we turn that into money? And if you do it that way, what happens is you should be going out to your frontline troops. That's your customer service people. That's your returns people. That's those very same salespeople that you've given those finely honed scripts to go out and browbeat people into buying. And instead, you should be asking them, what are people out there saying? Or go talk to actual customers. When was the last time you did that, for God's sake, right? Go see them at their kitchen table while the dog's barking and their kids homeschooling at the same table, and the food's burning on the stove, and then ask them what they care about. You don't need to, because they're showing you everything. And so the closer you can get to the front lines, the better off you'll be. In fact, some of the best sales and marketing copy that I've ever seen written came from really, really negative reviews that people left on websites, right? Or discussion forums. You want to know what people really think of your brand or your products? Go look at it unfiltered, and then turn that stuff into your copy, because that tells you their pain points, what they care about, the language they use. It's like the most effective market research ever. Stop doing stupid focus groups. Just go and look at the raw stuff as close to the front line as you can.
Yeah. I in part of the work I doing with leaders, certainly in the last year, and saying, you keep talking about Zoom fatigue and you don't understand it's not Zoom fatigue. And they go, what do you mean it's not Zoom fatigue? It's PTSD from isolation. That's part of it.
Yeah.
It's the lack of community. That's part of it. It's the fact that the kids are screaming in the background and they're trying to be professional. It's the fact that they have no pants on, but they're wearing a tie because they're on video.
Hey, this is one of my 3 Zoom shirts here, by the way.
I know.
I'm not telling you if I'm wearing underwear.
You wore that one last time. I remember you wore that last time. But so, but it's, the point is that I think that that's what I'm saying about, we go into this psychic bias is what I call it, right? Psychic bias, which is I'm gonna think what you're thinking. You don't know what I'm thinking unless you ask, but I think people don't like this. Well, have you asked them? No. I think our people, in order to be loyal, need an extra $100. No, they don't. Some of them do, but not all of them. Some of them are in a certain financial category do. Absolutely. But a lot of them, $100 is like, what's that? That's like, that's lunch. It's not an incentive for me.
Yeah. And by the way, you make a great point. We're talking about this, marketing, sales context. A lot of times as a leader, your constituencies are inside of your company. I'll give you a perfect example. One of the highest costs you're ever going to have is your employees and the turnover. I mean, it's about 2.5, 3 times annual salary to replace somebody. That's the true cost of it, right?
Yep.
So if you,
2.2 times.
I'm sorry?
2.2 times the annual salary of an
Yeah,
individual
to replace someone. Think about that.
Train them. Yep.
And that's, so there's this huge loss going on in companies that are turning people over, right? And so, and a lot of that has to do with who you select and why you select and whether there's going to be a culture fit with your company. So again, your job is to say, here's the kind of employees we want. And if you're one of these kind of people, we definitely don't want you.
Right.
So it's to self-select people out and to reinforce that story. This is what we value in employees. This is who we're looking for. This is who we don't want. Again, those bright lines in the sand, if you will, are really important. So another important constituency is the employees you attract and what you say to them.
So let's take that to the next level and let's talk about something that is very primal. If we watch movies about it, we watch documentaries about it, we read books about it, and I don't think we think of it as contemporary, and we need to. Talk to us about ritual and the importance of ritual in commitments.
Yeah, so the longer I live, the more focused I am on embedding things in the body. So if you think about music, for example, if you go to some kind of rave, it's like boom, 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 120 beats per minute. What's that time to? That's supposed to mimic the heartbeat. That's a very excited state. Whereas if you go to listen to ultra chill lounge music, it's just the opposite. It's very slow heartbeat stuff, right? So all of our experiences and how we bring everything in is through the senses. So ultimately, it's all grounded in the body. And a lot of times, ritual is the way to invoke that. And ritual can be as simple as repeating something, Pledge of Allegiance in the case of American schools, right? It's a repeated ritual. We do it. Another thing, when I was salsa dancing, my brother, I told him how much I enjoyed it. He said, well, of course, it's one of the rituals, the only rituals we have left in the Western world. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, when you have couples dancing, you have the approach, asking someone to dance, dancing with them, returning them to their place where they were sitting. Like all of this stuff is actually pretty highly structured. We don't think of it as like the Japanese tea ceremony, but it's similarly intricate in terms of the expectations. And if those rituals are followed, then we have a certain reassurance. We have a structure. And it resonates deeply. It almost doesn't matter what the ritual is. It's the fact that there is intention and a deliberate way of doing something. And I think it's really underestimated.
So how can we use ritual, for a leader watching, listening to us, how can we use ritual to embody what it is that we're about, we as the company or as the...
Well, it's going to be different for different organizations, but I'd invite you to look at the in-between places. Like pre-COVID, if you went to theme park and the best ones in the world are run by Disney, what you'll find is your actual experience of the theme park is, 2 minutes on Space Mountain and an hour and a half waiting in line for Space Mountain, right? So what they really deliberately did at those theme parks is design the experience of being in the line. It's the intricacy of, okay, you turn a corner, what do you see? Does the line look long or can they hide the fact that it extends behind something? The music playing, visual distractions. So your time in the line is actually part of your Disney experience. And so they're working that in between the rides experience very, very deliberately. And I think the same thing that, we don't do enough entering and exiting out of things, bookending them. For example, if you work at home right now, one of the suggestions I have for you is leave your house, go for a 10-minute walk, come back and start your workday. You just commuted to work. And you need that 10-minute buffer and to get out of the house as a way of resetting that space. And do the same thing at the end of your workday.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been telling people to do it at the end of their day.
Yeah, well, both.
If you are going from the bedroom to the living room, then you're still in work mode. Yeah. You actually have to leave the office.
Yes.
Go for a walk.
Yep.
And I said, I don't care if you just go around the block once.
Exactly.
But put your coat on, go for a walk, short one, doesn't matter, long one, whatever you prefer, so you can come home from work.
Yes.
And I actually make my clients laugh about it. And I say, and when you come home, say, honey, I'm home, because
yeah,
it's actually a signal that I'm no longer working to
yeah.
them and to your own brain.
Yes, and so I guess so. One form of ritual is the beginnings of things and the ends of things. Make them very, very deliberate, and codify them, and make them intentional, and spend time in those transitions. That's one form of ritual. Another is anything. That's one of the things that's really powerful, especially for leaders and organizations, is synchronized group activities. I don't care if it's the wave in a sports stadium, but or if it's singing in a choir, or doing Tai Chi in a group, or yoga in a group. Those things are really powerful. In fact, they've shown that you don't have to even like the activity in order to get the benefit of that. So group synchronization rituals are really, really powerful.
So I get that they're powerful. Now we've got a leader listening who's going, but why? Why would I do that? Why would I take, this is a very funny and nice idea, Dov. I like the idea of going out and coming home saying, honey, I'm home. Yeah, I like the idea of that, but why does it matter? I'm a solid guy. I can turn that off. No, you can't. But tell them why. Because you're the expert on the primal brain.
Think of it this way. There is the whole history of who you are is encoded in your body, your present state. Your body is your history. Okay. And whether it's stored trauma or belief systems or lack of sleep or whatever is impacting you at the moment, okay, your body is it. It's the final word. And so these rituals work at the level of the body and of resetting the brain. And so they're one of the highest payoff things you can do. And again, especially in a group, you're literally synchronizing and improving tribal cohesion. You're literally getting everyone on the same mental wavelength and the same experiential wavelength. So it's a really, don't give them that $100 raise. Make them do group calisthenics like the Japanese do in large workplaces.
Yes.
In the morning. That's much more powerful. And that's why they do it. It's not because they're, silly Eastern rituals. It's because they find that it makes them more money.
Yeah. That's really important and powerful. So you mentioned something there in passing, but I want to bring it back because, again, I know I was horribly guilty of this in my 30s, maybe even into my early 40s, of not acknowledging the importance and value of sleep, particularly in the context of the brain. And I want you to bring it into context in the way of, because you're talking about the primal brain. So we want to talk about sleep in the context of the prefrontal cortex, the higher rational thinking part of the brain, and then that more sort of mammalian and primal parts of our brain, and the adrenal systems and all that. Just if you can sort of, I know I just dropped a ton on you.
Wow.
There.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to really fast forward through this because there's so much to say about sleep. I have a whole chapter, as you know, about it in my book. Sleep is critical. It's daily life support. It's not optional. Any creature that lives longer than a few days on this planet has some form of sleep. Okay. So if you're binge watching Netflix or scrolling through your social media feed just before you go to bed, and you're cheating yourself of your sanity and ability to learn. Humans in particular have super compressed sleep with a lot of demands on it. Most of our ape cousins sleep 10 to 12 hours a day. We average 8. And we came out of the trees onto the African savanna to a much more dangerous environment. So we basically have more complicated social structures and we get less sleep. So our sleep is heavily taxed. And anything below that level of 7 to 9 hours a day is you're literally killing yourself. You can't learn new things. You can't learn new intellectual skills or physical skills. If you rehearse some kind of sports, free throws in basketball or something, and you didn't get a good night's sleep, you didn't actually learn the skill. There's no benefit at all. Okay. No. But one of the most important things from a leadership standpoint and organizational effectiveness is creativity and being able to read social situations. If you don't get sleep, you can't associate past experiences with the new ones. So you lose those creative connections or the benefit of those new experiences because they're not effectively integrated into your past ones. And also the social stuff. They've shown that people that don't get enough REM sleep, they basically take a more paranoid and aggressive stance against the world. When you ask them to read micro expressions on people's faces, they tend to think that people are more negatively predisposed to them than they really are. So basically it makes you paranoid and aggressive. And we've all seen that when we're on short sleep, right?
Yeah, we're all a little irritable or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
right?
so you're misreading situations, and a bunch of those things, 1,000 of them over the course of the day in terms of interactions, you're going to have very different outcomes as a leader if you're not reading people's emotions properly. So anyway, sleep is optional. Sleep is first. It's not diet, exercise, and sleep. It's sleep, and everything else gets layered on top of that.
Yeah, it's fascinating for me because I've been a health nut for more than 40 years, but I didn't pay attention to sleep until probably 15, 16 years ago. And it was like, well, I eat right and I exercise and I'm doing, and I'm meditating and I'm doing all the right things, but I wasn't doing the sleep. So, I mean, there was a period there for about 5 years where I went on about 4.5 hours sleep a night. Sometimes I would sleep in and get 6 hours, 4.5 hours sleep a night for 4 or 5 years. Right?
Wow.
And I would have a 20-minute nap, which was fine. I'd have a 20-minute nap. And that
which
was
is
good.
important, but it's no substitute for a good night of sleep.
So,
yeah, I mean, you hear about these like 4 a.m. people, like they make a pact to be up at 4 a.m. to be more productive. If that's coming out of 8 hours of sleep, you're killing yourself, literally. Really self-destructive, bad idea.
I think the 5 a.m. club and the early morning rituals are fantastic. What time are you going to bed?
Exactly. If it's 9 o'clock, feel free to get up at 5.
Exactly. Like I phone my son and I say, and he said, I told him, I said, oh, you didn't pick up last night. He goes, I was in bed. And I go, what time is it? And he goes, it was 8:30. I was in bed. Like, because he gets up at 4.
That's fine. 7 to 9 hours.
He gets up at 4. He gets up at 4 for work. 8:30, he's in bed. Right?
Yeah.
It's like,
well, what you can't do is cheat and have short sleep. So when you said like 6 hours, would be a long time for you. It turns out that 2 6-hour sleep periods back to back is the same as losing a full night of sleep. It's the same cognitive effect.
Wow.
Yeah. So that extra hours where most of the REM sleep happens, that final hour and a half cycle of sleep, about half of your REM sleep for the night happens then. So you're really cheating yourself of all the good stuff. The hind milk, as they say in baby feeding.
Right. Well, the good news is I don't do that anymore. As we come to the end, Tim, this has been a fabulous conversation, and I really thank you for all the insights that you brought to leadership, and I think will really help people to understand how to tap into it. And of course, your book lays it out beautifully. But before we finish, there's always 2 things I like to do. One is like to ask you to make sure that our audience knows where they can find out more about you, your book, and all your resources. We'll come to that in a moment. But I always like to say, give our listeners, our viewers, something practical they can do, preferably right away, that will allow them to really integrate a lot of what it is we've been talking about. If you had to pick a thing, what would it be?
We just ended on it, Dove. I mean, I don't know if you teed it up intentionally, but get 7 to 9 hours of sleep tonight and every night for the rest of your life. Most important leadership or life tip I can give right there.
Yeah, and I fully agree with it. It's so important, and that A-type personality that you like to think you have as a leader is actually the detriment to you, because it tells you don't need as much sleep as other people, and that you're logical and rational. And if you don't have enough sleep, you're anything but logical and rational. You're a paranoid lunatic who people want to kill, but they won't tell you because you write the check.
Yeah, and by the way, there's a reason that sleep deprivation is used as a torture and interrogation tactic, because it works. If you want to destroy someone's self-control, do that.
Yeah, and and just to sort of tie that together, one of the greatest tortures is sleep deprivation. You just said it. And the other one is isolation, right? And so you're already suffering from isolation if you've lived through COVID. So you've already got that detriment. You can't afford to add to that a lack of sleep. So, so you're already in the red. You've got to pull that up with enough sleep.
Agree. There's a mental health crisis, a big tidal wave building behind, even if once we come out of lockdown. And I think we're going to look at this age and look at supermax prisons, which combine those two things, lack of sleep and isolation. And we're going to think that was the most barbaric thing that we did in the early 21st century.
You and I talked about this on the other show on Curiosity Bites, that I think we are on the brink of a massive tidal wave of tsunami of mental health issues for organizations. And that's where they've really got to focus. And they think, well, it'll be better when everything's back to normal. No. You'll have massive PTSD from this to deal with. Anyway, with that, it's been a fabulous show. Thank you so much. Please tell our audience where they can find out more about you, your resources, the books, all the wonderful things you offer, and how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I've spoken at over 200 events across 4 continents. I also do quite a bit of digital marketing advisory. So if you're interested in that, just check out timash.com, timash.com. And if you're interested in my latest book, Unleash Your Primal Brain, Demystifying How We Think and Why We Act, that's at primalbrain.com. And it's available everywhere in all formats. I recorded the audiobook. There's an ebook and paperbacks.
Fabulous. And of course, we will make sure that we post all that in the show notes, timash.com, primalbrain.com. You can find Tim on LinkedIn. You can find him on Instagram. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him on all those kinds of places. Again, Tim, thank you so much for being with us. I've loved our combo. I'll always love chatting to you, mate. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your insights. And for you, dear listener, I want you to remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes. Just go inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your customers and your employees don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. Because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the power of unleashing your primal brain. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am